Well, check this out, how different elite runners can have completely different running techniques. Kelvin Kiptum has the arm movement where his hands moves in circles and it's almost like he's a boxer. Tigista Sifa, on the other hand, has very sharp angles in her elbows, which is the opposite of Jukka Ando, who runs with her hands down here. And Swedish running legend Anders Szalkai runs with his hands out here. So these runners have really a completely different running techniques, but actually they don't. The way they move their hands is largely a consequence of how they move their bodies. And when you look at that part, it's relatively similar. They just have their forearms at slightly different angles. In this video, you will learn how this works. So welcome to another episode where we dwell into the wonderful world of running technique with me, Fredrik Zillen, your running technique specialist, who is as important to your running as the lightsaber is to Darth Vader. One thing that can be a little tiresome for people like me who work with biomechanics in running is that many people who comment on running technique look at the wrong things. They start at the end of the extremities, then they look at how their hands and feet of the runners move. And then perhaps they look at the legs and arms. And then they stop looking. Of course it matters where and how your foot hits the ground and how much force is applied to it and everything else. But no discus coach in the world would primarily look at or comment on how fast the hand moves through the air before they release the discus. It is certainly important how fast the hand moves at the moment when you release the discus. The faster the better, of course. But an experienced discus coach, you look at the entire movement, from how the feet drives the hips, which drives the core, which drives the torso, which drives the arm, which causes the hand to move super fast at the moment they release the discus. You don't just look at the hand. It's exactly the same thing in running, but in the opposite direction. How you move your shoulders and shoulder blades will affect your core and hips, creating a powerful stride. In a few different videos, I have talked about how you should keep your legs relaxed when running, just like you should hold a tennis racket very loosely when serving to allow the movement of the body to make your arm move like a whip. And it's the same thing throwing a baseball. You can't have any tension in your arm, then you won't throw that hard. And this is also where the expression whip from the hip comes from, which many sprint coaches talk about. So if we imagine now that legs and arms are the soft part of a whip, then the body is the handle of the whip. Here is how it works. Let's imagine that this playing card is your body. The shoelaces I've taped on the card is your legs and arms. And maybe we should also use a potato as a head to make it clearer. Or maybe not. When the body moves like this, it sets the shoelaces in motion. It is therefore the diagonal movement in the card, that is the body, that largely creates the movements in the shoelaces, that is the arms and legs. If you are stiff and immobile around the shoulders and shoulder blades, you will not get this whip effect. So if you try to keep your upper body still, in the belief that it saves energy, you will destroy the movement, which means that you have to work harder with fewer muscles when you run. You become the opposite of energy efficient. Here you can see me on Swedish national television explaining on how this works just before the 10,000 meter race at the World Championships in Tokyo this year, when the whole of Sweden was hoping that Anders Szalkai would win a medal, which he did. Andreas also holds the European record for the 5,000 meters and 10-kilometer road race. You can also see how they have drawn the diagonal lines across the body that I'm talking about in this clip. So let's look at how the movement of his shoulders and body affects how he moves his hands and arms. Here we see him in the race where he broke the European record for 5,000 meters. As you can see, his hands swings slightly towards the middle, which is a consequence of the movement up here, as opposed to him consciously moving his hands inwards. It's more this. And this is, of course, linked to his hips and core, which create the leg whip. Unlike some other runners, Anders Szalkai keeps his torso relatively still and works with short, snappy movements through his body. Compare this with the runner behind him, who has the same movement but also move his chest more like this. Presumably, Anders' short whip-like movement comes from the fact that he was a middle-distance runner in the beginning of his career. For example, he won the bronze medal in the 800 meters at the Junior World Championships in Eugene in 2014. And the 800 meters requires a lot of power at the speeds required. Anders' hands moves something like this. And if I move my hands slightly closer to the middle of my body, it looks more like this. As you can see, there's really no difference in the movement in my upper body, only the angle of my forearms is slightly different from here to here. Yeah, well, there are some other differences, but not that much. It's this part that drives the arms. But who runs like this? Well, Eliud Kipchoge, for example, here on the left in the white shirt. He is the only person who have run a marathon under 2 hours. He makes quite distinct circles with his hands. And the same goes for Kelvin Kiptum, who holds the world record for the marathon. Here he moves almost like a boxer, like this. Circular hand moving sideways slightly. Almgren, on the other hand, has his hands more like this, and not the Kelvin Kiptum movement. But it obviously works well enough for 2 European records. I would also like to show you this clip, because the movements I'm talking about is very clear here. It is from a World Championship final in the 3,000 meter steeplechase. And in the front of the group, in the lead right now, is Simon Sundström, who has very clearly this dancing movement in his body, his hip, his torso, his arms. The same thing can be seen in this clip from a few years ago during a technique sessions he had with me. So, Kipchoge and Kiptum are here. Anders Szalkai is more here. If I now move my hands further out to the side, can this also be a good runner? Yes, it can. Because here we see the running legend in Sweden anyway, and the most recent Swedish male to win the Stockholm Marathon, Anders Szalkai. He runs like this. But if we look at how his body moves, I'm going to move away from the camera. Here, it's quite similar to the other runners. Kipchoge and Kiptum were here. And Anders is here. Kind of the same thing. Well, sort of. And the funny thing about Anders is that throughout his career, he was told that he had a poor running technique. He has also been the editor-in-chief of the Swedish edition of Runner's World magazine for many years. And when I started writing about running technique in his magazine in 2018, he said, well, it is a bit embarrassing that I have such poor running technique. But he doesn't. He has just been told that he has poor running technique. What happened when his coaches told him to keep his arms more still or move them forwards and backwards like this was that he lost this whip-like function throughout the body and therefore the power in his stride. This didn't work, but this did. But let's pretend that his arm movements are not 100% optimal. It is such an important part creating this energy-efficient power, that it would be a mistake to ask him to move his arms like this. Now let's look at two opposites. We'll start with Tigist Assefa from Ethiopia, who has held the world record in the marathon and recently won the silver at the World Championships in Tokyo in the marathon distance. She has very, very sharp elbow angles. She runs more like this. But she has the same good movement in her shoulder, shoulder blades, torso, core and hip. And here we have her opposite, the Japanese runner Yuka Ando, who has her hands down here. She has a relatively high cadence and runs more like this. My point is that how the body moves is important, not always where the hands are. They can be important and play an obvious role in the running efficiency, but maybe not. Yes, if we look at how the body moves, remember the card with the shoelaces? There is actually no major differences between Kiptum, Anders Szalkai, and Yuka Ando. Or Gensevedi Baba, who runs like this, and he's perhaps my favorite runner when it comes to running technique. Yes, there is a slight difference, of course, but my point is that it's much more important to find this dynamic power through the body than exactly how you position your forearms. And I noticed just the other day that we share this hip rotation to generate power through the legs with some animals. For instance, just look at how beautifully my puppy Stina rotates her hip when we are out walking. It's not that the body of the dog is still and she moves her legs like this. The hip moves to create the whiplash effect in her legs. And by the way, did any of these runners follow the extremely common running technique tip? Your hands should move straight forward and backward. You want to move forward, not sideways, so your hands must move in the direction of travel if you want to run with good running technique. People who give bad advice talk with that voice, I'm sure, I don't know. But that's just not the case. Because if world record holders, those who have won gold medal at the World Championship and the Olympics, do not move their hands straight forward and backward, maybe they are the ones who are doing it right. And your confident running body who says that you should run like this is wrong, because the best runners in the world, at least a lot of them, are moving their hands like this, or this, or this. It's the dancing body that we are looking for. And to get this whole idea across of how it is the body that moves the arms and legs, as opposed to the body being still, I'm moving my legs and arms, I have come up with an exercise that I call Run Like a Dead Octopus. These are also the words that ended up in the headline of the latest issue of the US edition of Runner's World magazine, where I am featured in an 8-page article. And by the way, I think it would look great on a t-shirt. Well, if I sold merchandise, which I don't yet. And maybe you should check out where you end up if you go to runlikeadeadoctopus.com. Or check out the quotes from the runners who have taken my online course in efficient running technique. You can find them in the description below. And that's all for today. Feel free to click like and subscribe and run like a Finnish Laponian dog or a dead octopus, and I'll see you in another video.